too, um, and greetings to everyone. I'm John Lennon. I'm was to be standing in for Nuzira, who has not been feeling well, and so she asked me to uh, sort of get things started today, and I'm happy to do that on behalf of the Global Beat Foundation, which is an organization that is relatively new. You are all aware of it. Nuzira and I and her husband and 4 or 5 other people whom we'll talk about shortly were in at the beginning and had a quite a challenging time getting started, but we're underway. And this webinar today is one of the kinds of programs that we have been putting on. The pandemic has made it very difficult for the Global Beat Foundation to do the kinds of activities that it has wanted to do in South Asia and here at universities. But we hope that this will all be good preparation for the kinds of things that we'll be able to do at some point in the future. We also want to recognize the American Pakistani Professionals Chamber of Commerce, which is a very important organization, as you know, and we're very grateful to Ajaz Siddiqui, president of the chamber, for collaborating with us and for being with us today. So that you know me, my name is John Lennon. I'm no relation to the Beatles, unfortunately. I do sing, but I won't hear, really. I have a master's degree in journalism from the University of Maryland, and I was among other things, over a long career at the Voice of America. I was the program director and retired 9 years ago as the associate director for strategy and plans. On behalf of Nuzira, I'd like to welcome everyone here. And the theme of this webinar today has been organized as a celebration of the 75th anniversary of U.S.-Pakistan relations. It's a very significant part of our activities. We had planned that Nuzira, as the founder and chair of the Global Beat Foundation, would open today's proceedings. She has been suffering from a minor infection, and we hope that she will recover completely from that soon. We'll be hearing from her at different points in the program, but she asked me to stand in for her. We have a distinguished panel of experts and analysts joining us today, and we're grateful for their willingness to participate. Nuzira has already mentioned some of you, but they include Professor Arif from Towson University, welcome. Idris Ali from Reuters, Ambassador Durrani from the Islamabad Policy Research Institute, and Elizabeth Horst from the State Department, and we're very grateful for your being here today. We were also hoping to be joined by Josh Meyer from USA Today. He, however, has had an emergency in his family and was called away and is not able to be here. We were also hoping that Ambassador Khan, Masood Khan, might be able to be here, but he is unfortunately ill himself and won't be able to join us. I would like to introduce Global Beat's dedicated team, a group that has contributed greatly individually and working together under Nuzira's leadership to the success of the foundation. We may hear from them today during the webinar, as they may wish to contribute to the discussion. I don't know if we have Fez Rahman here yet. He is also from the Voice of America and has been a participant in our activities. Khalid Shiraz, Zafar Iqbal Fawzi Ishtiaq, and Fatima Akhlaq. In a few moments, Miriam Sabir will take over the proceedings in her role as the moderator. In addition, we'd like to thank valuable friends of the foundation, Khurram Shahzad and Yusuf Chowdhury, President and General Secretary of the Pakistani American Press Association, and also Asfar Imam from the Voice of America. We thank them for being here today and for the invaluable support that they have given to Global Beat during its early years. Nuzira, would you like to acknowledge the presence of anyone else while I'm running down the list here?
Excuse me, no. You
Okay.
can go on.
Okay. So unfortunately, you see that Nuzara has not been feeling well. We hope she gets completely better very soon. Nuzira and all of us associated with the Global Beat Foundation would also like to take a moment to pay tribute to Nadim Hotiana, a dear colleague and former press minister at the Embassy of Pakistan, whom we lost to COVID-19 in 2021. We all miss him for his energy and enthusiasm, a keen sense of humor that is so often needed for effective diplomacy, and the wisdom that contributed so greatly to so many of our deliberations. We wish Nadim was here with us today, but we are certain that he is with us in spirit. And before we proceed with the program, we'd like to talk a little bit about the Global Beat Foundation. If Nazira, if you have the slides. And you can all read along with me. This will be very brief, but we just like you to be reminded of who we are and what we are hoping to be able to do. And in fact, why we are honored by your presence today in discussing the topic that we're going to talk about. The mission of the foundation is to emphasize the importance of journalism in promoting the values of fairness and democracy in society. If you saw the Washington Post this week, you noticed that there was an article about the media in Pakistan and the current growing discussion in Pakistan about the extent to which the former administration in Pakistan is getting coverage. Can you go to number 2? Just to let you know that we're on the up and up, as we say. The Global Beat Foundation is a nonprofit organization promoted by women, and it aims at uplifting the standards of journalism in South Asian mass media by providing education, training, and support to journalists. This is an extremely important part of the mission. We have been very frustrated at our inability, because of the pandemic, to do more of this kind of thing, and we hope to in the future. Our core values are professional integrity, journalistic credibility, and a code of ethics with which everyone will comply. We are incorporated as a nonprofit organization in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we have been certified by the Internal Revenue Service as a 501c3 organization, which makes us tax exempt. And we can go to the next, and that is our activities are to conduct training when it's possible. That's something we hope to be much more actively engaged in the future. We want to organize discussions very much like the one today, but seminars where we can talk with young people who have not already achieved career goals, but are fast on the track of heading toward them. We want to have interactive discussions. We want to provide a forum for emerging issues, such as free media in Pakistan, and for heaven's sakes, in the United States. We also want to engage in other forms of assistance as identified and possible. And our initial focus is on Pakistani media in Pakistan and the United States. In terms of seminars and discussions organized by the Global Beat Foundation, nothing more need to be said about that by me right now, because we're about to have one. And there are some additional slides that perhaps Nuzira can run through. I won't read them all, but they're included in this package just to give you some idea of the things that we've been doing. A workshop in the Sindhi language in March of this year, for example. And the next one would be, have you got the next slide there, Nuzira? Anyway, there's several of them.
It was the instruction. The instructor was Dr. Mariam Sheikh. She's a press counselor at Pakistan's permanent mission in New York.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the next slide is this one.
Yeah. In April of last year, a discussion on the press and the nation rise and fall together. This is sort of a conceptual framework that we talked about, and as you can see, there were representatives on the panel from a range of organizations, BBC, VOA, magazines, and universities, and of course Nusira was there, even though she's not in the picture. We also have we had a discussion, it was a very good discussion actually, on U.S. presidential elections in 2020, the hopes and concerns in South Asia. And that was a spirited discussion that included many of us who are here today. And we were very happy to be able to have conversations about that at that time. And in fact, Miriam, our moderator today, was an analyst and present at that discussion, one of many.
Yeah, and we have somebody from a journalist from India and Pakistan, PTV.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the next slide.
And interaction with young achievers. We're focused on students and young people to the extent that it's possible for us to be so. What we want very much, I think I'm saying this appropriately, Nusira, please correct me if I'm wrong. Those of us who are, I'm certainly the oldest person here. All the rest of you are young, spirited young people. We don't want the elders in our discussion to be preaching to young people. We want to be able to engage with them, to inspire them, to mentor them, to help them grow. And as you know better than I, they are very actively pursuing careers, not just in journalism, but in public engagement and public service in their homes, wherever that may be, India, Pakistan, in the United States, elsewhere in South Asia. And in May of 2018, we had an interaction with Young Achievers, and it was a very good organization. It was a very good organizational effort to accomplish the purposes that I just outlined.
We missed this one, first casualty in war. Sorry.
And when I was in journalism school a very long time ago, the first textbook I had was the title of it was The First Casualty in War, and it is about what happens with truth. And we've seen some of that in South Asia, in Europe, and in every conflict that we know about, in which human beings have fought with one another. Truth is a very scarce commodity when there is human conflict. We all know that. But it's important to point that out, especially if we're dealing, as we do, as we hope to do more of, with young journalists. Because their obligation is to tell the truth, is to report facts, to analyze when possible, certainly, but also to be truthful in their reporting. And so we had a discussion about that in April of 2019. We had a very good group of panelists, and you, in fact, you see Nadim right there in the middle. And as I said, he was an invaluable contributor on so many occasions for us, and we miss him. And then in going back to September of 2016, just before everything changed in the United States and in many other parts of the world, we had a panel discussion on electing the next U.S. president and what is at stake. Not much needs to be repeated about the substance of that discussion, because I think it's all obvious. We have lived through that, but it was a very important conversation at the time, and it's obvious that it has had an awful lot of repercussions since then. But we were very, very pleased and happy to have panelists then of the caliber that we had. And our intention was to shine a light on some of the major issues that were facing American voters and everything that went with the presidential election that was then upcoming, which introduced to the world, really, the presidency of Donald J. Trump. And the last one, Desira. Thank you. If you have, let's see. I think what I would do now is turn the program over to Mariam Sabia, who is our moderator for the day. Mariam has a master's degree in political science from Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. She's a freelance journalist and a political analyst. You saw her included in many of the slides that we just showed. She writes and lectures on South Asian politics, freedom of the press, and education. Her work has been featured and widely shared on Al Jazeera America, the Huffington Post, Daily Times, Friday Times, South Asia Magazine, and the Dawn Pakistan. And in many ways, she is the personification of the ideals that we wish to promote in the Global Beat Foundation in terms of the rising generation of young, energetic, wise journalists, not only in South Asia, but everywhere. Mariam, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, John, for that introduction. And I want to thank all of you today for joining us on a Saturday afternoon when I know everybody could be doing a lot of other things during the summer. The topic of today's webinar is the focus of the media at the crossroads of US-Pakistan relations. Where are we headed? And as mentioned earlier, it is the 75th anniversary of the two countries having bilateral relations. We are really, really grateful to have some very distinguished guests with us who are experts on US-Pakistan relations. Each speaker will have 7 minutes to give their talk. And during that time, we ask that you please kindly keep yourselves on mute and don't interrupt the speakers. We will have a question and answer following at the end. So feel free to write down your questions in the Zoom chat, and we will get to your questions at the end of the talk. Before we begin, I wanted to first thank and invite Mr. Ijaz Siddiqui, who is the president of the American Pakistani Chamber of Commerce, to say a few words first, as they have joined the Global Beat Foundation to do this webinar with us today. So Mr. Siddiqui, if you could please say just a very brief few words before we begin.
Absolutely,
Thank
Mariam.
you.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I will not take more than 25 seconds. Just want to let you know about the organization. This organization, APCOC, American Pakistani Professionals Chamber of Commerce, was created for main focus of having the community providing leadership, career, and professional development, networking, and especially for entrepreneurship. Anybody who is looking to need any help in that area, we are here to help. And that's the only thing. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mariam.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much again for joining us and for collaborating with the Global Beat Foundation for this very important topic. And thank you all again for joining us. The United States established diplomatic relations with Pakistan following the country's independence in 1947. That was 75 years ago. And as we've seen over the years, it has been, a friendly relationship, but there has been its due share of issues and problems and as well. So recently, last year in August 2021, the withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan has again exposed the fragility of the US-Pakistan relations. But at the same time, both countries are very important to one another. So today we're going to look into the dynamics of the US-Pakistan relationship more closely, and we're going to ask some of the following questions. Are policymakers in Washington, D.C. and Islamabad succeeding in enhancing bilateral relations? What are the goals of both of the countries? Are bilateral relations affected by the domestic battles for political survival by former Prime Minister Imran Khan, as well as former President Donald Trump? We saw that there's been a lot of talk on both sides. Have we seen an impact on the US-Pakistan relationship on the so-called war on terror? And also the rising influence of China and Russia and all of the different dynamics that we face. So I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Rauf Arif. He is an assistant professor of mass communication at Towson University. He has been published in major newspapers in Pakistan, and his political observations on US-Pakistan relations have appeared in the local US media. Dr. Arif is an author of 2 books. He also writes as a contributor for Forbes magazine. He writes about social media and digital social movements, artificial intelligence, cross-cultural media practices, public diplomacy, and how information and communication technologies are contributing to change the overall dynamics of human communication from being face-to-face to becoming virtual. Dr. Arif, I will give the floor to you. Please continue.
Thank you very much, Mariam, and thank you so much, Nuzera, and everyone for this wonderful opportunity. I'm really pleased and very happy to be part of this panel, and I'm really looking forward to learn from each single one of you. I kept thinking, like, how should I just try to handle a very complicated issue, which is like media relationship between these two countries. Then I came up with this idea, how about we start with a brainstorming session? I have just 4-point agenda. And then once I share my views or kind of like my opinion, we can always go back and forth as Mariam, you suggested, like follow-up questions and stuff. So 4-point agenda is like, one is I just wanna give very brief summary of some facts which are relevant to both countries. A couple of points about opportunities that exist in the information age, particularly like we live in a very interesting era where information and technology is reshaping the world. Third, what challenges such an information age brings, and the 4th one is what potential solutions we might have down the road to move forward from here. So a couple of interesting facts that I just wanted to present here to all of you. One is like, look at the population between these two countries. In terms of size, Pakistan is a very, in comparison with the United States, it's a very negligible country, like twice the size of California. That's pretty much it. But if you look at the population of Pakistan, that's little over 220 million people live in Pakistan. 220 million people, like that's still not very updated information or data that's being compiled. It could be even more. But if we look at the population size of United States, is 330 million. So like Pakistan is pretty quickly catching up with US population. I hope it does not happen pretty soon. Like we don't have enough space to accommodate everyone. So that's one thing. Second, the traditional media users, kind of like comparison between these two countries, it's like in terms of very simplified version of traditional media use comparison between Pakistan and United States. So average TV viewership, for example, in Pakistan, average Pakistani spends around 2 hours every day. On the contrary, in the United States, traditional media use, particularly TV viewership, is 3.58 hours. So little more than what Pakistan's average person would spend on TV. And there are several different factors that we can discuss. Now, coming to social media, that's where it excites me more and also like surprises me more the more I research about this area. The more I myself am surprised and startled sometimes, like how things are changing quickly. Only right now, only 36% of Pakistani population is using social media. But now, if you do the math, that 36% is little over 80 million people in Pakistan are already actively engaged on social media practices. That's WhatsApp, that's Twitter, that's Facebook, that's YouTube, now TikTok, like all of those social media channels are becoming very popular. And at the same time, like supplementary to that, almost 174 million people in Pakistan, regardless of their income statistics, they have smartphones, they have mobile phones, and they are communicating with mobile phones. And that's another dynamic that we should all keep in mind when we talk about media, how cell phone medium, how mobile phone is becoming very, very important aspect of information and communication. In the United States, 82% population is already using social media or digital media, which is totally understandable. Like Pakistan has several challenges, including like power breakdowns every time. In Pakistani term, we call it like load shedding. So which we have been shedding for pretty long time, for last 75 years. So power outages is one problem that Pakistan has to deal with when it comes to internet situation. But in the United States, we are seeing that 82% of the population, which is around 270 million people, are already actively engaged on social media practices. These numbers are very important for us to even talk about any strategy, any policy that we want to devise to bring these two countries together. Average time spent on social media online in Pakistan is 413 minutes, which is around 7 hours. And I was surprised that it's the same for the United States. Now that's where the comparison starts becoming a little bit more interesting, because it's now equal time is dedicated on both sides of the spectrum. At this point, when I'm talking about social media and average time spent, I just want to give a clarification. I'm not even talking about video games. And that potential is there. Video games potential, not only in terms of just playing, but in terms of how much video games can be game changers, so to speak, in public diplomacy efforts down the road. So I'm not even stepping in there. So these were those couple of facts. A couple of other things, like when we talk about like traditional media relationship between Pakistan and the United States, both of those, if you look as a historian, they were never in an ideal state. Because Pakistan's perspective, like Pakistani journalists and Pakistani, like when I talk to some journalist friends back in Pakistan, there is always skepticism about the US treatment towards Pakistan, which is unfortunate, right? That needs to be improved. On the other hand, US media's history, if we look at Pakistani coverage, it oscillates between being very sympathetic to Pakistan, particularly like when there was Cold War era in Afghanistan and so much Afghan immigrants were coming to Pakistan and Pakistan had its own challenges and stuff. And then sometimes war against terrorism, and the oscillation goes towards like very intimidating kind of like portrayal or framing of Pakistani issue or Pakistani perspective. So like traditional media, unfortunately, from an academic perspective, continued to pretty much disappoint both sides, and both sides have their own share to take about it. So now, challenges is basically, so let's talk about opportunity. Opportunity is just digital media, information, social media, video games, and we all can contribute to that later. Challenges, when we can utilize social media and digital media to promote public diplomacy skills and stuff, at the same time, misinformation and disinformation or fake news starts becoming bigger challenge for all of us. What to do about it? You all have so much more knowledge and perspective in real life that I will learn from you all. I'm already doing research in this area from artificial intelligence perspective, and we are devising a couple of softwares. But this is an area like we need to talk about in terms of challenges. Second is, as Mariam mentioned, when political leaders start exploiting these social media tools for their vested interests. For example, what recently Imran Khan very successfully did in Pakistani scenario, or what Donald Trump did by using just Twitter as a very powerful medium and literally changed the way US diplomacy used to work and the portrayal of US to the rest of the world. So like in a way, like it's a new dynamic. It's a very big dynamic. It's a potential positively, and it's a challenge at the same time. If any political demagogue or any vested interest or any religious demagogue would want to utilize these tools to gain whatever they want to gain. So potential solutions to my mind, at least now, and I will wrap up, Mariam, I promise. One is we have to pay attention to social digital media in terms of what are the opportunities and what are the challenges in a way like we can understand this tool. It's a very powerful tool. It's a double-edged sword. It can go in any direction. Second is like people-to-people connection is very important. When I started writing about public diplomacy, and I was surprised, like everyone heard this word, nobody even tried to understand this word, and all the layman kind of approach, they started utilizing this, coined this term and started like saying, hey, we are engaged in public diplomacy effort, even though they were not sure. They did not even have any clarity what this effort is. So I would say solution would be, first, we have to institutionalize this public diplomacy effort. When we say people-to-people connection, it does not mean a raw connection. It means it has to be sophisticated effort on parts of governments and some non-profit organizations, such as this Global Beat, and how to go forward about it. Third is launch initiatives to provide context with information. When we give context, when we share information on these social media tools, the information travels with the speed of light. So now we have to start devising strategies how context also travels with the speed of light along with that information. That will help us a lot. WhatsApp alone, as I said earlier, or maybe I did not say it, WhatsApp alone has 2 billion users worldwide. How can we focus on individual social medium, and how can we devise strategies for each single social media separately, rather than just treating them as so. So when we talk about people-to-people connection, how WhatsApp functions is very different than how Twitter functions, right? Or how TikTok functions. Lastly, we have to make sure like we pay attention to the female population of South Asian region. Just in Pakistan, there are 49% women that constitute Pakistan, 49% of the population. And as I said, like out of 220 million, I'm talking about almost 110 million people, very intelligent women, very much educated women. They were neglected throughout the 75-year history of Pakistan, because it was such a male-dominated society. For the very first time, because of social media, you have started seeing that women have started actively participating in the political process. Earlier, when they tried to participate in the political process, even the male-dominated traditional media did not allow them. So now is the right time to pay attention when diplomacy, particularly devise some strategies just to target women population in Pakistan, and that will change. I will stop here, I promise, because I think I'm already exceeding my time limit, but we will keep going back and forth. Thank you, Mariam, and thank you everyone for for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Arif. You brought up some very important points. Definitely social media has changed the landscape of how media operates, but also how news disseminates amongst the population, because we see that, whereas it can bring up injustices and bring those to light, it can also spread disinformation very quickly. So that is definitely a very important point to keep in mind. Moving forward, we have a very special guest with us, and we're very lucky to have her. We're going to go a little bit out of order because she has to leave early. Elizabeth Hurst is a Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of South and Central Asia. She is responsible for Pakistan. She came from the U.S. Embassy of Berlin, where she was Minister Counselor for Public Diplomacy for the Germany mission. She is a member of the Senior Foreign Service. Previously, Elizabeth served as SCA's Director of the Security, Transnational Affairs and Assistance Office, and the Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Estonia. She focused on transatlantic security on NATO's eastern flank. Other overseas assignments include Kyiv, Ukraine, the U.S. Military Provincial Reconstruction Team, Zabul Province, Afghanistan, Russia, Tajikistan, Lahore, Pakistan. She has a bachelor's degree in history and German from the University of Kansas and a master's degree from the University of North Carolina. I will hand over the floor to her. Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much, Miriam. Let me get a sound check. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. First of all, let me thank very much the Global Beats Foundation and also the American Pakistani Professional Chamber of Commerce for bringing us together. I have to say the mission statement, particularly for Global Beats Foundation, is something I can't support enough. Journalists are the truth teller in this world. They are the ones who hold business and government and all of us accountable. They do it at great risk. I don't have to tell any of the journalists on this call how much journalists risk their life all over the world and pay for it, sometimes with the ultimate price. So thank you to the Global Beat Foundation and others for your ongoing efforts to keep the truth tellers telling the truth and keep us on the right side. I'll make my comments short so we have time for questions if you want, but I just want to say I've just started. As you can see from my background, I'm so new, I don't have anything in my house yet. I started this job about 5 weeks ago, but it's a really thrilling time to be joining the State Department's efforts on Pakistan. And in the beginning, we said this is a crossroads of US-Pakistan relations. I actually would argue we're in a very good trajectory right now. We have a long relationship, 75 years. We were with Pakistan at the very beginning because, like the United States, Pakistan is a country that was founded on an idea. And while the goal of that idea, perhaps like the United States, it's never quite getting there, it's not perfect, we're all on that trajectory of a state that has a very fundamental idea of a free country with a very unique identity. And so it's an exciting time to be celebrating 75 years of our diplomatic relationship. We're also excited we have a wonderful ambassador in Pakistan. And I think many of you have seen that Ambassador Blum has been incredibly active right now. We have decades of collaboration. We're going to have a high-level visit coming up in the next couple of weeks. And so I think we're not at a crossroads, but at a time when we're focusing on a lot of things that maybe have been under the radar for a while. And I want to just touch on 3 of them because they echo some of the things that have been talked about already. Trade. You know, Pakistan is a big country with a big population and should have a giant economy. It has a lot of young, educated people. We should be each other's biggest, best trade partners in some ways, particularly in terms of technology. But we are already growing in our trade relationship. Last year, we had 200 million more in terms of trade, and that is growing more and more. And our special representative for commerce and business affairs, Dilwar Saeed, traveled to Pakistan a couple weeks ago. He was there for a whole week looking at where the opportunities are. So I expect to see a lot of growth in this area because I think that's one of the places that we both recognize, particularly for Pakistan's economic Part of that trade, I want to note that this year is commemorating the 10th anniversary of the U.S.-Pakistan Women's Council. And I think many of you are familiar with the work of this, but it cuts into both the trade issues that we're talking about, and then also what Professor Arif talked about with working with women. Do not underestimate the economic or political power of women. And when you tap into that, that is going to also lead to the kind of growth we need. And this in Pakistan, and this is a public-private partnership between the State Department, Texas A&M University, and it works with some of the biggest companies in the world: Procter & Gamble, Coca-Cola, the Resource Group, CE, Citi, PepsiCo, the Hashu Group, the Hum Network. And it's all about bringing women into the economy and mentoring women so that they can be successful and help with that trade relationship. So that's the first part. Second part, also touched on education. When we're talking about young people, this is the best way that we do people-to-people education. We have one of the largest Fulbright programs in the world with Pakistan. Over 900 young Pakistanis and Pakistani scholars come to the United States every year. It's a great way to exchange ideas. I've said throughout my diplomatic career that the United States' best export is actually our education. Getting a U.S. education creates this network, this ties, this way of thinking about things. And so continuing with that is critical. The partnerships we have with the Pakistani universities and our 17 Lincoln centers. I got the number wrong. We have 19 Lincoln centers around Pakistan, are all areas where we are able to connect over and over. And part of this connection is our alumni network. Over 37,000 Pakistanis in Pakistan right now are part of that alumni network. So again, people-to-people contact that are on all sorts of levels that you're not always thinking about. And then lastly, in the field of science, technology, health, and climate, on July 25th, we did a health dialogue. First time that Pakistanis and Americans have come together to sit at one table to talk about some of the biggest health problems that we have. And this is extraordinary because 2.5 years into this COVID pandemic, we've shown that the United States and Pakistan can partner together. The United States has given a number of vaccines to Pakistan, both for adults and for children. But I want to remind everyone that very early in the pandemic, Pakistan came to the aid of the United States and gave us 25,000 suits and 100,000 masks when the United States was desperate for medical equipment. So this health relationship goes both ways. And I think as we are trying to combat a lot of the both communicable and non-communicable diseases, we're going to use this health dialogue to move forward. It's a two-way street. Lastly, I'd be remiss in 2022 if I didn't talk about climate. Climate touches everybody, and there are a few countries more than Pakistan that are going to be affected by the way the global climate is changing. But we also have an opportunity. It's a young population, can look at how we change things, how we use new technologies, and I'm really excited to see what we do in terms of climate moving forward. I'm going to stop there. I think I've laid out a couple of areas where people don't traditionally think about the positive points in the US-Pakistan relationship. I also don't want anyone to think that this is a relationship without its friction points. All relationships have friction points. But I think we know that there's a lot that we can work on that is not only for the betterment of our bilateral relationship, but also for regional stability. I'll stop there. I'm happy to answer questions or answer them when the time comes. Thanks. And thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for those positive words. And I think that is a very, very good way to look at the way forward. If anyone has a question, you may write down your question in the chat while the discussion is going on, because I know Ms. Hurst has to leave in shortly.
I have to leave at 1, so, but happy.
Yes, if there's any questions, we can take those questions right now, if anyone has a question. Or you may continue to put that in the chat. We will go to the next speaker. Idris Ali is a Pentagon correspondent for Reuters based out of Washington, D.C. He has covered the U.S. military for 5 years from Asia to Europe. Prior to joining Reuters, he worked as an investigative series for the Washington Post on the killing of journalists by foreign intelligence agencies. Idris Ali will focus on China's rising influence, Russia's evolving role in the subcontinent, uncertainty in the international economy, America's withdrawal from Afghanistan, and how these forces affect US-Pakistan relations in the near future. Idris, if you could please take over.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I won't take too much time, but I'll sort of focus on what you mentioned. So I started my career in 2014, covering the Pentagon, and at the time, most of my coverage and whenever I talked to sources, mostly at the Pentagon, Pakistan was always talked through the prism of Afghanistan, counterterrorism operations, how Pakistan was helping or not helping. And that was really my interaction covering Pakistan. It was very much through that prism. What's happened in the past 2 years is sort of this confluence of events, which in my opinion, and a lot of the sources I speak to at the Pentagon, has made them sort of more optimistic about the trajectory of US-Pakistan relations. Coincidence or otherwise, the focus of US foreign policy is now China, firstly, Russia, secondly, and then you have sort of these other threats to include Iran from a US standpoint. And that has really put Pakistan at the center of where the United States is looking. And it's one of the few countries that actually, as you all know, has pretty decent relationships with all of sort of potential adversaries for the United States. So whether it's China, good relations, Russia, pretty good relations, and Iran, pretty decent relations. So when I talk to people, and in my opinion, personal opinion as well, there's actually a lot of opportunity for Pakistan to play not just the role of necessarily a mediator, but sort of this country that is, able to not play both sides, but interact with both sides on an even keel. These days, what we're seeing obviously is a lot of concern in Washington about China, their military operations near Taiwan, but also some of the soft power sort of, events taking place, like building ports in Sri Lanka and Africa. And, I think the United States has an opportunity to sort of leverage Pakistan's experience in places like Gwadar, to talk to other countries, whether it's Sri Lanka or parts of Africa. So that's an important part of it. And, the one thing that struck out to me is for the past 15, 20, 21 years, the relationship, I think, was definitely at an imbalance where the United States wanted, it was very transactional. The United States wanted something, which was air rights or ground rights for their troops and equipment. And I think that weighed heavily on the relationship. I think this past year, since the withdrawal, has brought some level of balance into the relationship. And then when you sort of add together the fact that the US, in an interesting way, needs Pakistan, I think there's actually quite a lot of opportunity for growth, partially because of the regional dynamics, whether that be China, Russia, or Iran. And the United States is going to need Pakistan as it tries to interact with the Taliban government, because I think there is a recognition that going forward, you can't totally ice out the Taliban, and you need to work some way through it. And I think Pakistan provides that perfect opportunity. So uncharacteristically, I am optimistic about the trajectory of relationships, and part of it is just geopolitics has sort of played in Pakistan's favor. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Idris Ali. That was some really great points, including that the United States does need Pakistan, and it did need Pakistan even prior to last year, where they were working on the Doha Accord agreement. Pakistan also played a role in that, and it will be very interesting to see the future role of Pakistan in trying to work together with the Taliban and all that entails. Again, if anybody in the audience has a question, please write it down in the group chat. And we will get to the questions shortly. Let me see, I think we have one here. We have one question for Elizabeth Hurst, and then we will move on to our next speaker. Sarah Atif writes, thanks for your candid presentation, Elizabeth. You rightly highlighted the effectiveness of US-Pakistan educational partnership. How do you think US-Pakistan involvement in the war on terror, specifically the use of drones, negatively impacts Pakistanis' population's perception of the United States? That might be a tough question, but Elizabeth.
That's a good question. It's a great question. First of all, I want to thank Idris. I thought, I'm glad to hear some cautious optimism because I think we share that on the security front, and that relates to this war on terror. The withdrawal from Afghanistan it's truly a pivot point where, to your point, I think more than ever, we're not seeing Pakistan solely through the lens of Afghanistan. And I think that's really important. Pakistan is a big, significant country that deserves to be seen for the role that it plays in geopolitics. And in a lot of ways, the withdrawal from Afghanistan has freed us from that. So totally agree with what Idris said. To Sarah's question, how does the US-Pakistan involvement in the war on terror or the use of drones impact the Pakistani people's perception of the United States? I think a lot of times there's been a lot of attention on the drone wars and others as a way to beat up on the United States. And one thing that President Biden and presidents before him have made really clear is that our involvement in Afghanistan was to prevent a terror attack on the United States again. That is exactly why we did the strike that took out al-Zawahiri a few weeks ago. But I think it's important to remember that Pakistan itself has suffered terribly from terrorism. And I read a statistic this week that I think said 80,000 Pakistanis have died because of terrorism, and between 10 and 16 million have been displaced. So this is not the United States war on terrorism. This is also Pakistan's war on terrorism. But sometimes that gets lost in trying to pin it solely on the United States. So I think if we can get beyond that and recognize that no one wins when people are allowed to use terrorism as a tactic, and in fact, the people who feel it most are people in Pakistan, it'd be nice if we can get off of that kind of narrative and more focus on tamping down extremism in all its forms, taking care of terrorism together, and then focusing on the things that are going to create actual stability.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We will move on now to our next speaker. And again, the audience, you guys can continue to ask questions in the group chat. We're very lucky to have former Ambassador Asif Durrani with us today. Ambassador Asif Durrani, before retiring in 2018, has served as Director UN and Director Disarmament. He has held various diplomatic assignments in Pakistan, missions in New Delhi, Tehran, New York, Kabul, and London. He has lectured in Columbia University, Hofstra College, New York, Chatham House, London, National Defense College in Kabul, National Defense University in Tehran, National Defense University, Islamabad, and various other places. He regularly appears on national and international media as an analyst on regional issues and is a regular contributor to newspapers. He is currently serving as a senior research fellow in Islamabad Policy Research Institute. Ambassador Durrani, please take the floor.
Thank you, Mariam. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Right, okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate and I'm thankful to the Global Beat Foundation and American Pakistani Professionals Chambers of Commerce for inviting me, and my special thanks to Nuzaira, a very dear colleague for almost more than 4 decades. But that doesn't mean to show our ages. We are, in fact, now senior citizens. Well, today's topic is very important, and thank you, Mariam, for a long introduction, which actually I don't deserve, but yes, I did work in the Foreign Service for about 32 years, and before that I was journalist. That's how I was a colleague to Nuzaira Azam. So, as we all know, that the US and Pakistan relations are as old as Pakistan's life. in 75 years. And I fully agree with Elizabeth Horst about the 4 issues she has raised, which can in fact give boost to a bilateral relationship in the fields of trade, education, scientific and technical cooperation, as well as climate change. Because right now, if you look at Pakistan, while the kind of calamity we are facing in the form of cloudbursts and rains and floods, in fact, but the positive side of this calamity is that the water table in Pakistan has risen, and from water scarce to water stress status, now we are in fact we are now a water sufficient country as far as aquifers are concerned, and water table has risen quite reasonably. So that is the positive side in Pakistan. So there is always an opportunity, even if when you face challenges. Bilateral relationship is an ongoing process, in my view, and which may face highs and lows. It's but natural. Even among friends, there could be certain frictions. So it's but natural. And US-Pakistan relationship is important. Being the 5th largest country in the world and 2nd largest Muslim country with a population of 240 million, Pakistan enjoys a geostrategic importance in South and Central Asia and the Middle East. So Pakistan cannot be ignored. It is not the question whether Pakistan or US relationship are there. It is there that Pakistan as an entity is very much there. Yes, economically we are down today, but we may not be down tomorrow. The reason is that if I look, when I was studying in SOAS way back in mid-90s, and we were discussing Brazil's and Argentina's inflation rate, which had risen to 1,500%. So here we have only 35% of inflation here in Pakistan. So it can be improved with better policy. So policy interventions are required, and I think that will be achieved. But main thing is that Pakistan as a mass, Pakistan as a military power, Pakistan as a young nation, Pakistan with a talent, both human resources and natural resources, as well as Pakistan's geography, because it's the bridge between South Asia and Central Asia, as well as it's an opening to the Middle East. It is also, in fact, on the mouth of the Gulf, through the Gulf of Oman, and then it neighbors very important countries. Right now, China and US, perhaps they may have frictions, but it was Pakistan which became the bridge and conduit for mediation between China and the United States. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger undertook his maiden visit to China through Pakistan, and he acknowledges that even today. So in a way, and we would be very much interested, in fact, that the US and China, they should improve the relationship, because this relationship is a win-win situation. If the friction goes, in fact, it will impact us very badly, not only Pakistan, but the entire neighborhood as well as elsewhere in the world. Just look at the Ukrainian crisis. Ukrainian crisis has impacted more than 100 countries in the world in terms of oil and gas, as well as wheat and food prices have gone up. The situation is bad in the US as far as inflation is concerned. So is in the UK and elsewhere in the Europe. So we are linked together. We are dependent on each other. So therefore, this cooperative relationship is always needed, even if there are frictions, even if there are, differences in approaches. Pakistan and US also had transactional relationship, which has been talked about much. There have been frictions which were there, whether it was in the 50s or whether India conducting nuclear tests and US imposed sanctions on Pakistan. And while we are right now non-NATO ally, we are under sanctions. Reason being that the US has issued travel advisory to Pakistan. So it means you can't conduct normal business with Pakistan. Following the American example, so Europe has also imposed travel restrictions. The result is doing business with Pakistan has become expensive. So I think these are the things which need to be looked into, that on one hand, if I'm a non-NATO ally, and then on the other hand, if travel advisory is issued about Pakistan, so it means on one hand, you gave me something, and from the other hand, you have taken it back. So I think this needs some more dialogue is needed. I can say it because I'm no more in the government service, I'm no more in the diplomatic service. I know perhaps Elizabeth would not be able to say it so frankly, but let me tell you. So these are the things. Then you talk about Afghanistan. There have been, some uncomfortable statements coming from the United States about Pakistan's role in Afghanistan. But don't forget that it was Pakistan since 2010 that it facilitated these talks with the Taliban. And it was, that's why in 2013, the United States allowed the Taliban's diplomatic mission in Doha. It was working since 2013. Onward, then the contacts which were established between Taliban and the US, so they culminated on 29th of February of 2020 in the form of Doha Agreement. And Doha Agreement was actually a mutual agreement, which means that the United States agreed to the conditions. So were the Taliban. So then the US cannot blame either Pakistan or, for that matter, I have no love lost for the Taliban, but with the Taliban as well, because they shook hands and then they departed and they said, well, US is withdrawing. The reason was there was a bipartisan support and agreement between in the United States about the withdrawal of the US troops. President Trump called it a wasteful war, and President Biden, he stuck to the withdrawal schedule. So here, but we became the casualty. That's the problem. We facilitated 27,000 evacuations from Kabul, but not a single word of thanks coming from any of the corners from the United States. So these are the things which are noted. Right now, whatever the Zawahiri's killing is concerned, I don't think it went. It came through all of a sudden from the skies. No, there were certain collaborations which happened. So collaboration was there. But one thing I should make it clear when it comes to Afghanistan, and it is the India factor. And we have no qualms in telling that, yes, Pakistan and India were in competition in Afghanistan. And India was using Afghanistan territory as a second front against Pakistan, because on the direct front, they entered into ceasefire. And they have always used the Afghan territory to cause disturbances in Pakistan. They are supporting financially to the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan TTP and the Baloch dissidents. And mind you, they are playing with fire, because on Balochistan, if they think that they can cause troubles in Pakistan, then I think more than 12 insurgencies are ripe in India. And I think Pakistan would be naive not to enter into that. So far, Pakistan is not, I'm privy to that, so it's not been. So this is a serious no. And when we used to tell the United States, they would look the other way. So that was the cause of friction. So the question is, when we are blamed about not honestly or sincerely helping the United States, we helped. Like they helped us selectively, we helped them selectively. It was, give and take. There's no, I don't have to apologize for that. I have been dealing with Afghanistan since 1978. And even now I'm dealing with Afghanistan. So the question is, with Afghanistan, when it comes to Afghanistan, then we have the upper hand from all respects, whether ethnically, whether religiously, or whether geographically. And then we both have a symbiotic relationship, which President Karzai used to call as conjoined twins. So we have a love-hate relationship, which is quite normal in the tribal setup. But we also invoke the concept of Pashtunwali, which means when there is a need, we come to each other's rescue, which we did. President Karzai, in fact, gave all his helicopters when there was an earthquake in 2005 in October in Pakistan. He had 6 helicopters. He told me, I was Short Air Affairs, he told me that 2 are out of order, 4 are at your disposal, along with 50 members of the team. So mind you that Afghanistan itself was needing a lot of help. It was also looking, in fact, it was looking to the world for everything, right from food to equipment to vehicles and the salaries of their employees. Even then, when there was a problem in Pakistan, so they came to our rescue. So was the case with Pakistan right from the beginning, and almost at one point of time, we had 4.5 million Afghan refugees on our side. Still, we have around 3 million Afghan refugees on our side. So there was a need, and the United States, because of the transactional nature of the relationship, they would not bother to appreciate the sensitivities. So this is what I wanted to underline. But now, other issues, when we talk about, there's a tremendous scope of cooperation, which is, I think, which will go on, because Pakistan and cannot ignore United States, or United States cannot ignore Pakistan. When it comes to China and Pakistan, I think China, number one, China is our neighbor. So any sane foreign policy, any rational foreign policy would strive to have improved relationship with the neighbors. It's unfortunate we don't have good relations with India. It's unfortunate that we had friction with Afghanistan, but Afghanistan friction is tolerable. It's unfortunate that Iran is under sanctions. Otherwise, we don't have any dispute with Iran. And we cannot do normal business because our banks are dollar-based. Unless we go and take another step to enter into currency swap agreement, and that would be a separate thing. But along the Iranian borders, we don't have our troops. We never had that. We don't have the problem with them. We don't have any dispute. We may have, differences in perceptions. So in that manner, China is our strategic ally. There's no doubt about it. With the United States, perhaps it may be a transactional relationship, but with China, whatever industrial base Pakistan has, it go over to China. Whatever are, in fact, they have always come to our rescue when and help whenever it was needed. $62 billion investment never happened in Pakistan's history. It is there. United States is objecting that this perhaps if we have the IMF program, we'll be paying to that. That was, I think, just a rhetoric. Otherwise, the Chinese loan is just $6 billion. The rest is investment. So there are problems. Whenever there are some infrastructure issues, we have capacity problems. For instance, our specialized economic zone, which China is establishing, our people are not trained enough to cope up with those industries which are to be installed on Pakistani soil. So these are the problems. But the United States will have to appreciate. It will have to appreciate that if we were the bridge between them and the Chinese, we can still be the bridge between them and the Chinese. And then we are, in fact, a source of stability in the region if we can play that role. We are very much ready to have good relationship with India. But right now, the Indo-US partnership, it looks under the rubric of Indo-Pacific Partnership, which starts from Wellington and which ends at Wagah. So it means Pakistan is excluded. Fine with us, because we don't have, we will not brag about it or beg about it. But it is up to the United States. You can dish us. You have dished us in the past. We are ready. We have, in fact, thrived more under sanctions, United States sanctions, than than when we became non-NATO allies. That is also there. The reason is we have to have a frank dialogue. We have to have a partnership. India, for instance, India dished you, if you call it a dish. Had we done it, it would have perhaps been a big scandal. India did not support you on Ukraine. They abstained. The reason is because you want to use India against the Chinese, so you can tolerate that. So I think I can go on, but here the chances are yes we can, and the outlook in Pakistan is westward looking, which includes the UK, United States, Australia, or New Zealand. Our people don't look towards China normally. But when it comes to the strategic relationship, I think then China is the reliable ally. I'll stop here. I'll welcome any question if I can answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Durrani, for that very candid discussion and candid remarks. You focused on the positive aspects of cooperation, but also the aspects where tensions exist. I think this was a very interesting and a very positive discussion about both the positive points of cooperation, whether it's trade, education, health and climate, social media, working together for terrorism, and working together in the region, and then also the tensions that do exist and exist in any relationship. We have one last question. If each of the three speakers that are left here, if all of you may very briefly touch upon the answer, and then we can close the discussion. Sheher Bano asks, there is always misunderstandings between Islamabad and Washington, despite a long history of cooperation between the two. How can this misunderstanding be reduced? How can we build it on a positive side for the new generations of US and Pakistan? I know Ambassador Durrani also touched upon this, that there has been so much cooperation with Pakistan and the United States with Afghanistan. At the same time, the United States blames Pakistan for some of the things that didn't go right. At the same time, we saw recently with the Imran Khan, former Prime Minister Imran Khan's government has blamed the United States for meddling in its affairs. So there's a lot of blame to go around. At the same time, there's a lot of positivity on ways that the two countries can work together and have to work together because they need each other. So if each of you, maybe starting with Professor Arif, could just very briefly for 1 or 2 minutes, and then we can conclude.
Thank you, Mariam. That's a great question. The way I would see, like, we have to utilize social media, as I said earlier, in a very strategic way between these two countries. When I say strategic way, first we have to make sure, like, social media, not in general, rather like what should be the strategy for Twitter? What should be the strategy for using WhatsApp? What should be the strategy for using Facebook, etc.? By doing so, we have to bring more, we have to make sure that public diplomacy is deployed in a very strategic way between these two countries. And when I say public diplomacy is deployed, it's not something like randomly somebody is just going on social media and saying hi to another person, which is okay. But we have to be strategic. We have to pay attention to opinion leaders. Those opinion leaders should be able to move forward between people-to-people connection in those like common grounds. Of course, there will be challenges down the road, but let governments deal those challenges. Let those officials deal those challenges. But when it comes to people-to-people connection, there is health, as Elizabeth talked about, climate, education, right? And so many other positive common grounds where people-to-people connection can move forward. So I would say like social media is an opportunity for the very first time in our hands that we can deploy to bring those two countries together, because I still believe in building bridges rather than building walls.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Arif, for participating today and for your remarks. Idris Ali, if you could please share your brief answer if you would like to, and then we'll move on to Ambassador Durrani, and then we'll go to the closing.
Sure. Yeah, very quickly. I mean, the one way I've noticed is quite helpful is sort of visits and government-to-government talks, even if they're not about specific things. So I think we've seen the head of CENTCOM, actually, he's in Islamabad today, talking with different generals, and stuff like that is really important just to get to know each other, make sure there's no misunderstanding or miscommunications. I know the Prime Minister, I think, spoke with some students from Harvard the other day. So I think building those sort of bridges when things are not tense and when things are going well are very important for when things do, become tense or tip over. I thought relations would be sort of on the down for a while after some of the comments former Prime Minister Imran Khan made, but clearly the relationship is at a point where it can overcome, periods of tension. So yeah, I think just sort of, government to government talks, even if it's not about specific things, can be quite helpful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for joining us. Ambassador Durrani, if you have any closing remarks.
Mariam, I think the question itself is very important and has been adequately answered by Dr. Arif and Idris Ali. So I can only add that there has been reference about Imran Khan and also President Trump. These are two unique characters in our political history. They have had their own axe to grind, and I think they would go by their instincts rather than going by the institutional advice. So that's how I look at the state of affairs between the US and Pakistan, and his so-called blame of conspiracy hashed by the US. I don't think as a professional we should give much weight to it. I mean, it was nonsensical. Our criticism cannot be a conspiracy, and secondly, a conspiracy cannot be hashed openly or publicly. So that was nonsensical. So, and that in fact only added some unnecessary friction to which, and I think for which now he is being blamed within his own party, that it was not a good move. He may try. Right now, he is promoting whatever way he's convincing, and yes, he's charismatic to the extent that he should have been like a Satar Eidi, building hospitals and education institutions. Running the government is not his cup of the tea. This is my honest opinion, because he just cannot grasp things which are needed for the statesmen, for the leaders to understand the nitty-gritties of politics, especially international politics. And any wrong move or any wrong statement can cause disasters. As long as he was sticking to the brief, he was reading from the paper, he was okay. But as soon as he would go extempore, he would in fact throw bouncers, and that is how we had the embarrassment. So here between the United States and Pakistan, there is an institutional mechanism which is at work. It has always worked, even if there were sanctions against Pakistan. So I don't think that whether it is a social media or others, that can do much as far as institutional relationship between the two countries are concerned. Rather, I'm a little bit skeptical about the unbridled use of the social media, in fact, especially in Pakistan. that has created, new reporters who are not obliged or who don't give any respect to the personal integrity or to the respect of others, and they cause embarrassments, they cause problems. For them, it may be a fun, but it can create a lot many problems. So I think there's a need to regulate the social media according to the laws of the land. And because this kind of, because even in the United States where I served, or in England, you have the press council, where if you have the complaint, you can always lodge a complaint with the press council. But in Pakistan right now, we don't have anything. To which if some wrong has been done to me, I have no recourse to, and our courts don't decide. They take years and decades to decide. In fact, they don't decide. When there's a defamation case, there's no decision so far in this country. So I think there is a need. We may have entered this social media age, but we have not geared ourselves to be trained for that. So this is what I wanted to say. I mean, and those are impacting, in fact, the relationship. So there's a need, we have to be careful while using social media.
Thank you. With that, this has been a very discussion. I'm sure we can continue this discussion for many more hours if we wanted, and we can definitely have a follow-up, whether even the last point Ambassador Durrani made about, the aspect of social media, and then how we counter that with free speech and disinformation and a lot of different things. Thank you so much for your candid responses and a very enlightening discussion. I will hand it over to Nuzera and John for the closing, and I just want to thank everybody for attending today. Thank you.
Before Miriam, I'm sorry, Miriam, thank you very much for doing such a wonderful job of harnessing the intellectual energies of all of the panel members, and thank you to the panel for your wonderful comments and for your participation today. I would just make about 1 minute's worth of comments of my own about sort of an overarching view of some of the things that we've discussed, and then I would turn it over to Nuzera to close out the program. Elizabeth Horst made the observation that Pakistan is a young country. I would like to point out that at the end of 75 years, the United States was a mess, and it was on the very beginning edges of a terrible civil war where 750,000 people died. 7% of the American population was killed in a civil war while it was still a young country. What makes us mature is to work hard on some of the issues that were discussed here today. The United States is still working on those issues almost 250 years later. And so I think one of the things that the Global Beat Foundation, if I may speak for the organization, would love to do is to contribute to the educational platforms that are most useful on any medium to the young population in Pakistan and anywhere in South Asia. And that would be one thing. A second thing is small countries, countries that are not as powerful, look to larger countries sometimes as models and for leadership in all sorts of areas, economy, intellectual development, media is certainly one, political influence on populations and that kind of thing. In my informal judgment, the three leading countries in the world right now are Russia, China, and the United States. We're all very well tuned in to what's going on in the world. And I think all three of those countries in some ways do not provide idealistic models for future development by striving democracies. And so that's enough said on that issue, because that's the subject for a whole afternoon's worth of conversation. And the one issue that we didn't spend much time on today, but I think is an overarching issue, and that is climate change. There's scientific projections by responsible leaders in meteorology and geology and anthropology and biology to indicate that within our lifetime, perhaps, certainly within the lifetimes of our children, in parts of South Asia, it will no longer be possible for human beings to work in fields where crops are grown, to grow rice, to grow soy, to grow all sorts of other things that are substantial parts of human development, that make it possible for human beings to function at any level, at any temperature. But they won't be able to grow those crops because it will be too hot. Human beings can't function above 125 degrees Fahrenheit. This is an enormous problem. How are we going to cope with that? That is, for this afternoon, a rhetorical question. But for the rest of us, for all of us, it is a very real problem. And I think it would be wonderful if the United States and Pakistan, as was mentioned by a couple of our speakers, could work together on some answers to that question. It would bear directly on US-Pakistani relations, but it could also go well beyond that point. The last thing is, I think the key for journalists, Dr. Arif, I'm thinking primarily of you, and I would, if we had more time, it would be wonderful to know more about where you see these opportunities. But education of people at any age, but particularly young people, is critical. Don't allow them simply to retreat to social media for their education and their communication, because a lot of time will not be well spent, I think. Education is so important, and it's one of the founding principles of the Global Beat Foundation that we would try very hard to contribute to an international effort. The Global Beat Foundation is very small, but it has a big heart. And I'm going to give myself over now to Nazira, who can close the program, but also, if she would like to do so, talk a little bit about the uses that big heart could be made to influence the education of the current young generation that's going to inherit all of the problems that we have not been able to solve. Nazira?
Yeah, thank you. I just can't talk too much. So just want to thank you all for coming, and especially our panelists from Pakistan, from here, from State Department. And Idris Ali, where are you from talking? I think you are not in DC.
No, I'm in DC.
Oh, you are in DC. Okay.
Yeah, I am in DC.
Okay. And all the participants. And I want to invite Mr. Ejaz Siddiqui. He's the president of APCOG, to give a vote of thanks to everyone. And then we are done. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I hope you feel better after this, because you have done a lot of work to put this together, and that's why you probably are a little feeling or under the weather. But appreciate it. Thank you so much for all the panelists and all the guests. I'd like to especially thanks to people, Athar Ali for providing the technical support, and my daughter Alicia Siddiqui for taking the notes. And you will see that in the print media most likely. So on behalf of APCOG, I'd like to thanks everyone. And hopefully we can do something like this in person, so we will have more time to talk to each other, and probably over the food. So that would make it much better, instead of we just taking the sip of water and everything. So appreciate it. Thank you so much. And you have a wonderful rest of the day and the weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Asif,
Thank you.
Shehrbano, Yad Ali, everyone. Misbah, Muzaffar Azam. Thank you. We will see you in next program, inshallah.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.